Brian Kemp in Georgia. We'll get to President Biden's press conference. I promise we will. I can't miss it, but I think this is actually bigger news. The governor of the state of Georgia has signed legislation in Georgia to reform the elections of the state of Georgia. And nationally, Democrats and the media are going nuts. Elizabeth Warren actually tweeted this out. The Republican who's sitting in Stacey Abrams' chair just signed a despicable voter suppression bill into law to take Georgia back to Jim Crow. The Senate must pass the For the People Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act immediately. Our democracy is at stake tonight. She actually signed that, and she probably actually believes it because she's an idiot. We also had a headline at CNN. Georgia's new law suppressing the vote is a victory for Donald Trump. Those of you nationally are hearing about this effort in Georgia to restrict ballot drop boxes. Do you know what happens if the Georgia legislature does not pass a law on ballot drop boxes? They all go away. Now, why is that the case? Well, in Georgia, ballot drop boxes are not part of the law. They were allowed because the governor of Georgia has an existing state of emergency declaration over COVID-19. As a result, the state authorized, by way of the governor's executive order, ballot drop boxes for people to drop off ballots. When the executive order on the emergency declaration goes away, the authorization for ballot drop boxes goes away. So what did the state legislature do? They legislated into law ballot drop boxes. You can now have ballot drop boxes in the state of Georgia. They can only be in boards of election or in places with early voting, and they have to be collected by close of business, and they have to be monitored, which is actually a good thing. You do not want people showing up and destroying the ballots by pouring water into the ballot drop boxes overnight when no one's looking. The hysteria over calling it Jim Crow 2.0 is a fundraising device for Democrats designed to amplify and enrage. There is no difference, and I want to be very clear here with everyone. There is no difference between the Democrats calling this Jim Crow 2.0, you got to stand and fight, and President Trump telling a crowd of supporters in Washington that you got to march on the Capitol to defend the integrity of the election. There is no difference at all, except the media thought one was invalid and thought the other was valid, but they are the same damn thing. Park Cannon, a Democrat in the state legislature, began to try to interfere with the governor's ability to sign the law last night, and people on the left are hailing her as some sort of hero for trying to disrupt the lawful process of government, and the same people hailing her as a hero were upset about the people storming the Capitol to try to stop the Electoral College votes from being counted. It is the exact same thing. What you are seeing is the hypocrisy of the Democrats and the media, who are fine when the left believes crazy conspiracy theories and upset when other people don't. In Georgia, it is the law that if you show up to vote, you must have a photo ID. You must have a driver's license number, or the state will give you a free photo ID, and you must have that number. What they've done with absentee ballots is, instead of now examining your signature on an absentee ballot that could change over time, you have to put your driver's license or photo ID number and birthday on the ballot, and that will be used to verify your identity. There will no longer be signature matches in the state, which is good. My signature on my voter registration card is different from my signature now if I sign an absentee ballot. Completely different in form and style. Now, there are a whole lot of people who are already filing lawsuits on this, and it is a fundraising opportunity. What actually is in the law? Well, absentee voters will be required to submit their driver's license number or other documentation to verify their identity. There will be as little as 1 week of early voting before runoffs, down from the current 3 weeks. Why? Because the runoff will now be 4 weeks after the general election. That's very relevant here. In Georgia, that used to be the law. The runoff happened just a few weeks after the general election. The Obama administration sued and said it wasn't enough time for military ballots, so they stretched it out over a 3-month period. It will now be 1 month from the date of the general election, we'll have the runoff. That is actually a good thing, and most voters, if they knew that, would like it. There has been widespread belief in Georgia among Democrats and Republicans that the runoff window is too long. They also will allow ballot drop boxes, which is good. They also will allow weekend voting, and in metropolitan areas, they will allow more weekend voting. Weekend voting before general elections is going to be expanded. Mandatory voting hours on 2 Saturdays statewide. Counties will retain the option to allow early voting on 2 Sundays, but early voting before runoffs will be reduced to a maximum of just 1 week before the election. And here's the one that the Democrats say is controversial. The state elections board will be able to take over county election boards that they got to intervene. This is one of those issues where the Democrats are claiming conspiracy, but it's actually good. You have, for example, Fulton County Board of Elections in Georgia is a highly incompetent board of elections. That county has hired and fired the same person over and over. That county never gets its act together. It has nothing to do with partisanship. The county is just run incompetently at the Board of Elections. They'll be able to fix this. One of the other issues is the legislation sets a deadline to request absentee ballots 11 days before the election day. That's been supported by Democrats and Republicans. This is bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans. It disqualifies provisional ballots cast in the wrong precinct. That one, I'm nebulous. I'm kind of indifferent to. The one I think is dumb is it distributes food and drinks to voters waiting in lines. I kind of think that's dumb. I don't have a problem if you want to distribute food and drinks to people standing in long lines waiting to vote, as long as there's no branding, as long as there's no politics. I don't have a problem with that. But the Republicans wanted to get away with it in large part because the Democrats always outmaneuver and find ways to make it political with wink winks and nod nods. I think it fixes problems. It did not include, by the way, the final legislation, contrary to what the Democrats are saying, it did not include a proposal to end no excuse absentee voting. They backed off of that. Now, of course, the governor signed it last night, and they're already filing lawsuits against it. There will be a left-wing judge, I'm sure, that tries to hear the case, and I'm sure will try to obstruct it and drag it out. But I got to tell you, I think that it's a good piece of legislation. Also, counties will be required to certify election results within 6 days instead of 10. Election workers will be required to count ballots without stopping until they're finished. That was my idea. I want to take credit for this one. It was my idea. I talked about it on radio. I talked about it to members of the state legislature, and they have embraced it. Under current Georgia law, you can stop, go home, come back the next day, and pick up the ballots and hope that there's no hanky-panky overnight when no one's looking. Under the new law, once you start counting the ballots, you cannot stop. Now, to accommodate that, we will start allowing the processing and counting of absentee ballots before the election. As absentee ballots come in, they will be able to be processed now, which is another good thing. So we're not waiting days and days and days for the absentee balloting process. This is all a really good idea. It's all really good. I appreciate them doing it, and I think it's a good package. Now, the hysteria from the national media on this is going to be overblown. It's going to be over the top. They've had Stacey Abrams out everywhere championing the cause of Jim Crow's coming back in Georgia. I mean, I will go on and let's see. Do I have the clip? Maybe I don't. You got Joe Biden out there. Yeah, here we go. This is Joe Biden from his press conference yesterday. I guess he thought this line was clever.
Deciding that you're going to end voting at 5 o'clock when working people are just getting off work. Deciding that there will be no absentee ballots under the most rigid circumstances. It's all designed, and I'm going to spend my time doing 3 things. 1, trying to figure out how to pass the legislation passed by the House, number 1. Number 2, educating the American public. The Republican voters I know find this despicable. Republican voters. The folks out in outside this White House. I'm not talking about the elected officials. I'm talking about voters. And so I'm convinced that we'll be able to stop this because it is the most pernicious thing. This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. I mean, this is gigantic, what they're trying to do. And it cannot be sustained. And do everything in my power, along with my friends in the House and the Senate, to keep that from becoming the law.
Right. Jim Crow looks like Jim Eagle. I guess he thought that was clever. But more than that, this is one of the most interesting things here is that there's bipartisan agreement on pieces of this legislation. Watermarking absentee ballots, making the cutoff date 11 days before the election for absentee ballots, allowing ballot drop boxes. It'd be hilarious if a federal judge throws this out. Ballot drop boxes go away. I don't think we should have ballot drop boxes, by the way. I fundamentally am opposed to the idea of ballot drop boxes. But there you have it. The hysteria from the Democrats and the media who are not capable of dealing fairly with this legislation. They're not capable of fairly dealing with Brian Kemp in Georgia. I spoke to an event in Atlanta last night. I'm surprised I'm awake right now, to be honest with you. It was the Atlanta Young Republicans, which was a very large crowd, young and diverse, black, white, Hispanic, male, female. It was very diverse. It should give you encouragement for the future of a party. Joe Biden says he's not sure if they're going to be around in 2024. And we were talking about these issues and how to engage in the future on these issues. And one of the things that came up repeatedly is how do we do outreach into Black and Hispanic communities? Now, ironically, I'm listening to, was listening to book on tape and then reading to finish it up. Tim Keller has a new book out on the resurrection. It's actually a really good book. I cannot recommend this book enough. Tim Keller, he's probably, next to the Pope, the most famous theologian on planet Earth right now. His book is Hope in Times of Fear. He's actually going to join me next week on Good Friday on the radio to talk about this book. One of the things one of the quotes in the book is that living in Manhattan, that's highly secular, the secular elite claim they are helping the working poor, but the working poor in the boroughs of New York are relying on Jesus. The secular elite can't stand the guy, and the working poor love the guy. And it's just another reminder that the GOP can win on these cultural issues. The reason the Democrats nationally are screaming so much about Jim Crow, screaming so much hysteria about voter suppression, is because they are trying to scare people to continue to vote for them. But you know what scares people more than requiring their driver's license number on a ballot? What the wokes costing them their job because they say something that's unacceptable this week that was perfectly acceptable last week. That is why so many people are leaving the Democratic Party and moving to the Republican Party. The Democrats in the national press are scaring people over this, calling it Jim Crow when it's nothing of the like, because it's all they've got. They are a one-trick pony at this point.